Thank you, everyone. We're going to move to our next session now with two different speakers. We're going to start with Kevin Fournier from the National Ignition Facility, and then he's going to be joined by Caroline Anderson from the Fusion Industry Association. But let me please give a little bit of background on Kevin before he gives his quick presentation here. Just let me get to his quick, impressive biography. Kevin, and I should mention, Kevin is a board member of the Society for Science and User Research Facility. So I thank him personally for his engagement and the time and volunteer efforts he puts into helping our mission. Kevin is the User Office Director at the National Ignition Facility, and he's responsible for all aspects of successful fielding of cutting-edge high-energy density experiments at the facility, including soliciting and evaluating proposals for the highest scientific quality experiments, scheduling experiments to use the facility optimally, and helping experimental teams design their experiments to the facility's capabilities. He also manages the facility's review process for experimental readiness and is involved in planning strategically for new facility capabilities. He manages all communication to the constituencies that are the major users of the National Ignition Facility, as well as the other federal agencies that perform experiments under the National Security Applications Program. Kevin's an experienced researcher who has led experimental campaigns and computation collaborations at facilities around the world. Prior to leading the National Ignition Facility User Office, Kevin ran Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory's National Security Applications Program and implemented radiation effects testing plans for several Department of Defense agencies at the NIF and elsewhere. So I'd like to turn this over now to Kevin. He's going to give us some insight into what's been happening. I think almost everyone on this call likely knows what's been happening at the big scale at National Ignition Facility, but we'll find out a bit more of just what's happening almost behind the scenes there. Kevin, over to you, and then we'll bring in Caroline. I'll help introduce her after your presentation.
So I'm going to go through, I hope, a very brief presentation and leave time for Caroline. And I realize that I don't know the background of everyone who's on this meeting. And so I realize I probably didn't put really fundamental basic information in the charts. So let me up front just say, I'm going to be talking about fusion. Fusion is the process that powers the sun. It's when you force the nuclei of atoms together, they rearrange themselves and release energy. And I'll be talking about plasma, not a constituent of blood, but a high temperature gas that's electrically neutral outside of a certain volume. And so I'm going to talk about fusion plasmas, and let's go from there. Next chart. So actually following Professor Wilson's parting remarks, I am not speaking for myself or Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. I'm speaking for the national effort to pursue high yield fusion in the laboratory. Yeah, I see the cursor moving around. There are many labs that have leading parts in the enterprise, including Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, Los Alamos National Laboratory, Sandia National Laboratories, the Laboratory for Laser Energetics at the University of Rochester, and many other partners, including private industry such as General Atomics, Diamond Materials, Sidor Technologies, Luxel. It's an enormously broad endeavor, and I will talk more about that at the end of my 15 minutes. There are 4 approaches to fusion in the laboratory that the nation is investing in pursuing. The one on the left, you see laser indirect drive, is where we take optical energy in a laser pulse, convert it to X-rays, and use that to compress fusionable fuel to the point where fusion reactions become self-sustaining and it ignites. Complementary or parallel to that is laser direct drive. This is an effort that's led primarily by the Laboratory for Laser Energetics at University of Rochester. That's where you just couple the lasers directly to the capsule holding the fusionable fuel. You skip that step of converting the laser light to X-rays, which cost you energy. There are some challenges in achieving a uniform implosion with direct drive, but it's a much more efficient energy coupler. Magnetic direct drive, Sandia National Laboratories is really leading this effort, and they're using a different concept altogether without a laser. They use enormous amounts of stored electrical energy that they convert to electric currents that create magnetic fields that crush then a cylindrical target holding the fusionable fuel, and that can lead to fusion as well, very high gain fusion as a matter of fact. And then the double shell target, this is actually Los Alamos that's leading the intellectual thrust here. This uses either direct drive with a laser or indirect drive, where the laser is converted to X-rays, to drive an external capsule that slams into an internal capsule, hence the name double shell, and couples the energy to the fusionable fuel inside that inner shell through momentum coupling rather than a ramped in time pressure drive. This has its own technical challenges. And because of the value from having multiple approaches and broad intellectual engagement, the nation has been investing in pursuing research on all 4 of these platforms for fusion in the laboratory. Next chart. So as Dan alluded, we had a very successful result on December 5th of 2022 at the National Ignition Facility. We actually achieved ignition according to the definition given to the country by the National Academies of Science, which means that more energy was produced by thermonuclear reactions in the fuel than was delivered to the target. And in fact, in that December experiment, we had a gain of about 1.5, meaning that we had about 1.5 times as much energy produced just by the fusion reactions that we stimulated compared to the total energy delivered to the target. We repeated that experiment on July 29th of this year, 2023, and in fact got a target gain of close to 2. So progress has been steady. We've had multiple shots that have produced gains around 1 within the error bars of the measurement, but those 2 experiments, the December 5th shot and the July 29th shot, had robust gains well above 1. And so here schematically is an example of what the laser indirect drive platform for fusion looks like. At the National Ignition Facility, we have 192 laser beams that can be independently pulsed, shaped, focus pointed, whatever. We focus them all into an enclosure made of depleted uranium and gold that converts that laser energy into a bath of X-rays. The capsule, which is about 2 millimeters in diameter and about 50 microns thick, so about half the width of a human hair in terms of its shell thickness, holding multiple atmospheres of fusionable fuel, in this case, isotopes of hydrogen, deuterium, and tritium, receives the X-rays from the Hohlraum wall. Hohlraum, by the way, if you're interested, is German for essentially hollow or empty room. And it's really, that's what it is. It's a big can that turns the laser light to X-rays. The X-rays impinge on the outer surface of that capsule and ablate away material. And through conservation of momentum, the remaining material rockets inward, achieving velocities of up to 1 million miles per hour. In doing so, energy is transferred from that imploding capsule shell to the deuterium tritium vapor at the center of the shell. I didn't say, but we grow a thick layer of deuterium tritium ice on the inner surface of the capsule, about 17 degrees above absolute zero, above the temperature of space. You achieve a coexistence between a vapor state of the hydrogen gas and hydrogen isotopes and the solid state, i.e. deuterium tritium ice. That also rockets inward at about 1 million miles an hour. And if we do it just right, the fuel, the gas at the center of the core of the capsule reaches densities about 100 times the density of lead and about 100 million degrees centigrade in temperature. Thermonuclear reactions take place, and if that dense layer of frozen DT ice remains intact, the products of those initial fusion reactions are deposited into that layer of ice, initiating more fusions, which produce more products, which initiate more fusions, and so on until you have a runaway process or a burn wave that propagates through that fuel. And if it's done correctly, can yield many times more energy from the fusion output than was delivered to the target to start the fusion initially. Okay, next chart. So this actually summarizes some of those results. So the facility, the National Ignition Facility, was dedicated in 2009 and really began in ignition campaign experiments somewhere around 2011. And even though it's really hard to see, there's little bits of hair here on the x-axis of this timeline showing you the yields we were achieving circa 2013, 2014, 2017, 2018. Very hard to see because they were very low. And the dotted line is gain equals 1, meaning the fusion energy. Oh, I'm sorry, it's the line indicating 1 megajoule of fusion energy. The dashed line here is the maximum energy available from the laser as a function of time. And so we had it at a peak value of about 1.9 megajoules of laser drive. And recently, circa 2022, we goosed that up to about 2.05 megajoules. So about a 7% increase in the total laser output. And that small increase made a huge impact. In August 8th of 2021, we had a shot that by scientific criteria ignited, not the simple-minded criteria that's very criterion that was defined by the national academies for really unambiguous discussions in both the technical and the political space. But the August 8th shot was sort of the existence proof that we would be able to achieve ignition in the laboratory. It was very exciting. It was 1.9 megajoules of drive-in that returned 1.35 megajoules of fusion yield, so a target gain of 0.7. Didn't quite hit that threshold. And then we tried to repeat that shot and even had difficulty achieving that same level of performance, which was fantastic because we learned everything that we needed to know about optimizing the hidden levers that we were uncovering that we found affected performance, and were able to tune or redesign the platform to mitigate some of those failure modes or to optimize configurations to really excite the strong lever arms. And then, like I said, on December 5th of 2022, we had a shot that produced 3.15 megajoules of yield for 2.02 megajoules of drive. That's a gain of 1.5. And we repeated that experiment. The artist got carried away, or the plotting program or something. The yield was 3.88 megajoules. So the second bar all the way on the right here, the second red bar all the way on the right, doesn't actually tickle the little hash mark. It should be a little bit below. But regardless, the target gain was about 2. And we've since had, as I said, if you look all the way to the right on the plot, there's a number of red bars that tickle the dash line of max laser energy. So by definition, that's target gain of 1. And so we've had about 5 shots overall that have been greater than or equal to a target gain of 1 since December of last year. So very exciting time. Yeah, and so just to give you a sense of how significant this effort has been, I'm going to walk you through a timeline of the inertially confined fusion program in this country. It was actually, the concept was born by John Nuckolls in the late 1950s. John Nuckolls is one of the early directors here at Lawrence Livermore. He came to the lab with Edward Teller from Los Alamos and Ernest Lawrence from Lawrence Berkeley. He had the idea that fusion, like the process that powers the sun, could be initiated in the laboratory if you were able to inertially assemble a fuel mass, get it hot enough without it pushing back on you with pressure because it was hot, and keep it confined long enough for the fusion reactions to actually deposit their energy and start this burn wave. Next click. Circa 1960, Thomas Mayman invented the Ruby laser, and John Nuckolls realized instantly the driver he needed to do that fuel assembly had suddenly been revealed to the world. Next click. And so Lawrence Livermore and other institutions launched on a program of laser development, leading to a series of increasingly more energetic lasers as a function of time. In the early 1970s, for example, we pioneered the JNSAC laser at the 10 joule level of energy in the infrared. JNSAC is still available today as a user facility as part of LaserNet US, and supports, they've undergone a refurbishment the last couple of years, but now is planning to support several hundreds of shots of user experiments in FY24 and beyond. So even from back in the 1970s, this is still relevant to user facilities. There were other lasers that were developed, including the Omega 24 laser at the University of Rochester, which was really optimized to look at the physics of ultraviolet laser light, 3 Omega laser light, as I might call it, and also a 30 kilojoule system at 3 Omega at Lawrence Livermore called the Nova laser. Next click. At that same time, circa the late 80s, there was the U.S. Department of Energy undertook an underground nuclear experiments campaign called Halite Centurion, which actually put to rest all the fundamental questions about basic feasibility of achieving high gain in capsule implosions. Next chart. But the above ground demonstration still required that real high energy, high performance driver to do the assembly of the fuel. And so the Omega 60 upgrade took place in the early 90s, going to 30 kilojoules at 3 Omega. Nova was decommissioned. The Z facility, which is one of those magnetic drivers I talked about on the first chart, was stood up at a 20 mega amp current level at Sandia in Albuquerque. And there's a quote here that the committee, this is taken from another National Academy study. The committee now believes that uncertainties in ignition arise only from consideration of certain physics properties that can best be studied in laboratory experiments. And so next click. Circa 1997, ground was broken on the National Ignition Facility, the nation's commitment to go forward to what we, based on our understanding at the time, thought would be a large enough driver to achieve ignition in the laboratory. Circa 2010 or 2009, actually, the facility was dedicated at a 1.8 megajoule energy level. Next click. And then experiments began, as I said, circa 2011, and over the intervening decade, performance of the laser, the targets, the diagnostic systems all moved in the same direction towards progress, and ultimately culminating in that December 5th, 2022 shot. I'm moving my cursor, but probably no one can see that. That took 2.05 megajoules of energy and yielded, like I said, a target gain of 1.5, meeting the National Academy's definition of ignition. And you can see that the baseline of performance for the NIF laser moved from 1.8 megajoules at dedication or project completion to 2.05 megajoules where we sit today. So a fairly modest increase. And given the uncertainty in our understanding, when the nation went all in on building the facility to pursue ignition in the laboratory, the fact that the increase in performance that was required was so modest is actually quite a testament to our understanding of the basic physics issues at the time, circa in the early to mid 90s. And then, like I said, we did the demonstration and the repeat July of this year at 3.88 megajoules of output. Next click. So again, I'm going to kind of parallel something Professor Wilson left y'all with, which is to say the pursuit of ignition or inertially confined fusion in the laboratory is an enormous undertaking. I hope I gave you the sense that it actually was a 60-year journey to this point where we are today. So careers were born, performed, retirements took place over that entire course, but people stayed the course and maintained true to the vision. You can also see it's both a national and international effort. I list some of the main contributors to the mainline direction for indirect and direct drive laser-driven inertially confined fusion with the logos on the side of the view graph. You see AWE there. They're our UK partners. I mentioned Diamond Materials, they're a partner in Germany. The University of Osaka is a significant partner in laser energy engineering. So it is truly an international effort, as well as something that's really broad and has involved thousands and thousands of people across the decades. And I just want to make sure that everyone understands that I'm not speaking for Livermore's success only or the NIF success specifically, but really about the success of the national enterprise. And I think if there's one more click, can't give a science talk without showing a snapshot of a paper. And this is just the list of the authors on the paper that described the August 8th, 2021 result, that first scientific demonstration of ignition in the laboratory. So you can see just the intellectual contributions to the work for that publication, spans 4 columns here on my monitor. So it's a huge undertaking. Now, with all that, I'd like to run a quick video, takes about 2 minutes. I think I still have time. I hope I do. I don't want to eat Carolyn's time. So if we could run the video. So this is the National Mission Facility, nice drone shot. It's in Livermore, California. It's about the size of 3 football fields laid side by side by side. In our control room, we have, of course, system managers who are responsible for implementing and controlling all aspects of the very complicated system that is the laser. The laser itself is powered by 4 banks of capacitors that dump about 400 megajoules of stored electrical energy into the amplifiers. Simultaneously, when we take a shot, there's a seed that's delivered from a telecom fiber laser that about a billionth of a joule, 1 nanojoule of energy, is split into 48 separate seeds, each of which can be shaped and tuned, and then are injected into our preamplifiers, where they undergo 10 billion steps of amplification to about a 10 joule level. That 10 joule individual 48 seeds is injected then into the 192 independent beam lines at the NIF, and the light goes through multiple passes through energized laser glass. You see these pink slabs here that kind of light up as the light's going back and forth. In all, it goes through 54 steps of amplification in the main laser, and each beam comes out at about 10 kilojoules of infrared energy. So we've gone from a nanojoule, a billionth of a joule, to 10,000 joules worth of infrared energy. That infrared energy is converted to ultraviolet light on its way to the target chamber. You see the target chamber here, the big blue sphere. That ultraviolet laser light is focused onto the target. You see here a very good artist rendering of one of those hole-rom targets with the capsule at the middle. You see the laser beams here are shown being converted into the X-rays, and the X-rays are now interacting with the outer surface of that capsule, which rockets inward. And if we do it right, symmetrically enough, along a gentle enough push, we initiate fusions that then ignite the cryogenic fuel. So I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. That was that is some powerfully, no pun intended, impressive technology, and thanks. I really like the acknowledgement slide that you showed too, showing the number of people that are part of that kind of research in super tiny font. Okay, well, stay in essence here, because I was hoping that after you hear from Caroline, that both of you might just have some reflections on each other's presentation and the content that was there. Hello, Caroline. Let me give a brief introduction of our next speaker as she comes on screen here. Caroline Anderson is the manager for outreach of the Fusion Industry Association, which is a nonprofit organization composed of private companies working to make commercial fusion energy a reality. And I saw a compelling deep dive presentation on the opportunities and the activities throughout the fusion ecosystem by Caroline at the Tech Connect conference earlier this summer. And she has some compelling insight into the aspirational and actual next steps being taken in the fusion realm by different companies that Kevin was just outlining. Caroline joined the Fusion Industry Association in 2022 after working at a nonprofit where she coordinated economic development and economic empowerment and conflict resolution programs in the Middle East and North Africa. And she also worked at a think tank in Washington, D.C., specializing in international conflict resolution, foreign trade policy, and security, and now brings that worldly perspective into the realm of fusion innovation. So Caroline, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan, for the introduction. That was so nice. And thank you, Kevin, for your presentation. It makes my job a lot easier. And it's always tough to follow someone at NIF. We actually toured NIF last month, and it was just like the best day ever. It's so exciting. So incredible what you guys are all doing there. Yeah, I'm Caroline, a manager for outreach at the Fusion Industry Association, which, as Dan mentioned, is a membership association, and we're working to support our members as they work to develop commercially viable fusion power as quickly as possible. We also have a broad base of affiliate members, and these range from smaller component suppliers to major industrial firms, think tanks, law firms, utilities. Really, the list goes on in the ways our members work and also in the ways that they support the growing industry. So today, I'm just going to give a bit of a status update on where things are at in the fusion industry. And quick outline, we'll just do a little Fusion 101, which Kevin covered really nicely, so I'll be quick with that one. Talk a bit about current industry status, why there's been such a sudden growth in the industry, when we'll see fusion on the grid, and who exactly is working to put fusion on the grid, who's helping with that, and how is the Fusion Industry Association also supporting this. So first off, what is fusion? So bear with me here, but fusion is the power of the sun. We actually see and feel fusion power every day. It's the way that the sun and all of the stars in the universe make their power. It's when light nuclei fuse together at extreme conditions, so super high temperatures, and release huge amounts of energy. Unlike our fission friends, it generates no long-lived radioactive waste and is inherently safe from any sort of runaway meltdown. When you turn off a fusion device, it immediately stops reacting. Fusion at scale will be rapidly deployable, dispatchable, and distributable. Fusion produces no carbon emissions, and the fuel is widely available and also extremely efficient. So 10 million pounds of coal equates to energy as 1 pound of fusion fuel. So current status. So each year, the FIA puts out our annual report in which we try to take a snapshot of the industry as it stands year after year. And since this was our third iteration of the report, we launched it just a few months ago, back in July, we were also able to measure some cool changes from the past couple of years. So the major headlines from the report: there's been $6.2 billion invested in private fusion companies around the world. There's now 43 fusion firms, 13 of which are new. They either emerged out of stealth mode or just started from the ground up this past year. There's been a big growth in geographical diversity, where fusion, both on the public and private side, is being supported and developed. There's optimism in commercialization timelines, more government activity, but of course, there are still numerous challenges to actually seeing fusion power on the grid. So here's a graph of the funding growth. You'll see, so back in 2021, there was just $1.8 billion invested in private fusion. So it's been quite a leap to today with the 6.2. And out of the 6.2 billion, about 270 million is invested by the public side through government programs, public-private partnerships. I'm not going to go through all of this, but this is, again, just to show the sudden growth that's been happening in the past few years or so. So you can really see, like, starting around 2017, 2018, there was a huge uptick in the amount of fusion companies that emerged. So why is this happening? So this slide, I always feel like I sound like a Econ 101 professor, but we think of this as a factor of supply and demand. So on the supply side, there's been incredible scientific and tech breakthroughs that Kevin talked about that are allowing for these greater investments and development in fusion. On the demand side, I think we all are very much aware about how much the world needs a zero emission source of reliable power, just with all of the different crises that are ongoing. A little bit more detail on the supply side of things. So as I mentioned, the tech advances have been enabling things like new materials, like high temperature superconductors, really strong magnets, powerful lasers, new alloys, advances in high-speed computing, greater understanding of plasmas, advanced manufacturing. And again, as I'm going through all this, I realize that a lot of the people on the call are actually the ones that are working on these advanced materials. So again, preaching to the choir here. But then also something of note is that there's been an improvement in business model. So the fusion sector has now seen the Silicon Valley style of venture capital injecting greater funding, tolerance of risk, and urgency into the industry. And on the right, Scott Hsu at Department of Energy and Sam Wurzel at RPE developed. It shows the progress of fusion over time. So on the right, you'll see how, or throughout the graph, these are the major technology approaches to fusion. and it's plotted to see the triple product for each concept over time. So advances in a triple product, which is confinement time, density, and temperature. You need high amounts of each in order to achieve fusion. And so you can see the increase in development over time. Oh, okay, the demand side. So of course, fusion has the potential to be a tremendous climate solution. Meeting the climate goals are almost impossible without, again, a dispatchable source of zero emissions power. And countries around the world have started putting fusion energy in their climate goals to reach net zero by 2050. Fusion also has the ability to provide a tremendous amount of access. There's 1 billion people now that do not have access to energy, and hundreds of millions more do not have access to a reliable source of power. So again, the manufactured, exportable, dispatchable nature of fusion at scale would help alleviate those burdens. Fusion also has the ability to provide greater energy security throughout the world and be very beneficial in the geopolitical arena. So we saw recently with the Russian invasion of Ukraine just how disastrous it is when countries wield their energy sources and power over others. And that graph there shows just how interconnected the power is over in Europe. And furthermore, fusion is also a business opportunity. So Bloomberg valued a mature fusion energy industry at 40 trillion. And fusion companies are already spending over 500 million on their supply chains. And that's actually projected to increase to 7 billion per year by the time they build their first of a kind power plants, which is on target for somewhere between 2035 to 2050. So the great news about the fusion industry is that the target markets in primary market will answer all of those issues and capitalize on the opportunities that I just mentioned. So with electricity generation being the absolute primary market that all of the companies are working towards, there's also a lot of really great spin-off markets like space propulsion, marine propulsion, medical. Some of the fusion firms are already testing for doing cancer treatments based on the technology that they've been developing. There's also potential and use for off-grid energy, hydrogen and clean fuels, and industrial heat. So when exactly should we expect to see fusion on the grid? So this slide, I was just at Helion and Zap and Avalanche, 3 fusion firms out in Washington State last week. So I got a little carried away with the pictures. So I'm sorry about that. But the industry's timeline, as Kevin mentioned, it's been about 6 decades of research forming a scientific basis for fusion. And then we're now in the mid-2020s. Companies are building their scientific proof of concept devices. The top right, you can see Helion's. Then moving into the late 2020s, and firms will be designing and building their pilot plants. Moving on to the early 2030s, the operation of those plants and seeing first sales. And then the mid to late 2030s, seeing companies scale up and then rapidly deploy. So this middle picture too, I think is interesting. That's where Commonwealth Fusion Systems is planning on building their demonstration device right in here. Yeah. Oh, and something I also should mention is, although this says early 2030s, Helion, the company in the top, both of these pictures, they actually recently signed a power purchase agreement with Microsoft for Microsoft to begin buying their power in 2028, which is very exciting and very soon. So how confident are the companies in this timeline? We asked all the firms when they expect the first fusion plant will deliver electricity to the grid in our report. And this past July, 88% of the fusion firms said that they expect fusion on the grid in the 2030s or before. And furthermore, 84% expect commercial cost competitiveness on that same schedule. So who is doing this? Short answer, everyone. So the fusion industry, of course, the actual fusion developers, but also affiliated industries like suppliers, utilities are vital to the success and completion of seeing these timelines be achieved, as are governments around the world, national labs, user facilities, and universities. The partnership and collaboration is extremely crucial, and it's truly an all hands on deck moment right now for seeing fusion commercialization. So here is just a glimpse of our FIA fusion firm member companies. So we're at 38 members. They're based all over the world. I'm not going to go into detail on all of them, but I will just note that 25 out of the 38 are based in the US. And then there are others based all over the world. This is of the entire industry, not just our members. So you'll see, again, bulk in the US, but there are many in a few in Japan, China, Australia, New Zealand. The list really ranges on. So I'm definitely not going into detail on this one, but this is just to show that, like the geographical diversity, there's also a huge diversity in the technology approach that each company is doing. So within the 38 FIA member companies, there are truly 38 different approaches. There's of course a lot of overlap in some ways, like with magnetic and inertial, but they do vary in some way. And so we like to say that this is 38 shots on goal to achieve fusion commercialization on a timeline that matters. This slide is a lot. This is our affiliate membership. And like I mentioned earlier, these are the ones that are truly supporting the industry's growth and are vital to its success. So I talked a bit about what the affiliate membership looks like. So I'm gonna skip that, and I'm not gonna, again, go into depth on each one of these groups, but it's really a factor of suppliers and different associations, clean tech groups, utilities. There's really a wide range here. Global government activity. So that was the private side. On the public side, there has been an uptick in seeing more fusion support. Different governments are putting fusion in their national strategies. They're developing fusion programs and doing a lot of different activity geared towards accelerating fusion commercialization and supporting the industry along with the public programs that have been in operation. So just a couple of days ago, Japan recently put out some funding for some fusion firms based in the country. A couple of weeks ago, the UK announced another new fusion program. Germany, a few weeks ago, announced over 1 billion for fusion in the next 5 years. And there's been quite a bit of activity just in the past few years about this. All right, and then real quickly, I'll just go over a bit of specifics on the US side, just because that's, of course, where we are. So the White House hosted a fusion summit. Fusion energy at scale was listed as one of 5 key objectives in the net zero goals. Presidential budget request included over $1 billion for fusion energy, which was the highest ever requested. There's a bipartisan Congressional Fusion Energy Caucus that works to support for more federal funding for fusion. There was a Senate hearing on fusion, as well as a House hearing, both in the past year or so. And of course, an uptick in public-private partnerships. So one that you all may have heard of is the milestone-based public-private partnership fusion development program. And as the title is long, that's how excited we are about it. It is a fantastic program. It was modeled actually after the NASA COTS program, which, if you aren't familiar, this is a public-private partnership program that allowed for SpaceX and the space propulsion industry to really accelerate in recent years. So it's a cost share program, so the companies put up a bulk initially, and then they only receive commensurate funding once they reach their tech milestone. So they announced the 8 private fusion firm awardees this past May. And it was actually oversubscribed. We just did a quick survey of our members to see how many people applied and for what amounts. And we found that the program could have been grown 4 times in size, and it still wouldn't be enough funding for all of the quality applications. And Infuse is another public-private partnership program that we're very supportive of. It truly combines the expertise at national labs and universities and user facilities with the ambitions of the private sector. All right, my last slide on how the FIA is working to accelerate commercial fusion. So again, public-private partnerships, working to grow and generate those, not just in the US, but worldwide, working to ensure regulatory certainty. So making sure that fusion energy regulations is separate from nuclear fission. So back in April, the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission decided to regulate fusion completely separate than fission, which was fantastic. And now we're working to replicate that success to other countries as countries get more serious about fusion. And also building incentives towards a global fusion energy ecosystem. So ensuring that fusion is thought of on the same playing field, at least when compared to other clean energy sources. So things like inclusion in clean energy tax credits, things like that, and working to build the entire fusion economy and bring in voices from all communities, all industries, because truly it will take a village to do this. And that is exactly what is needed to match the potential benefits to match the need. I don't even think that last sentence made sense, but basically we need a lot of work to go in, and everyone at the table from the start.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I think the scope of what you're describing is obviously it's compelling and it's exciting, and I think there's the hope as well as almost the legacy of being a bit leery that the pace of fusion energy can ever quite get closer than being out there in that 10 to 20 year range. But what Kevin described before, are these benchmarks where we really are at the, I think you've said it in the past, Kevin, the Kitty Hawk moment has happened. And as I perceive, yes, we have space shuttles, but it started
the
with
Wright
something
flyer
like
just took off from the sand dune.
what the Wright brothers did,
yeah.
yes, and we're there now with what NIF has done. Kevin, to you for just a couple minutes, is there a comment or a perspective you would offer given what Caroline has just mapped out?
Well, I think the point to take away from what Caroline mapped out is just the dynamic community that she's representing, or that the Fusion Industry Association represents. That, you know, to get from that Wright flyer taking off from the sand dune to space shuttles or supersonic, around the world flights, the technology challenge is almost as great, but with the models that she described, the Silicon Valley model for investing, for example, the government supported public-private partnerships that led, for example, to SpaceX. So she cited specific examples where enormous technical challenges were met with creativity and engagement, and driven by the real potential for economic return. I think that's, super exciting to take the demonstration in the laboratory of target gain greater than 1 to something that, ultimately is going to be just another part of the infrastructure that could be, taken for granted and ignored, which is frankly where you want to be in the end with your power supply. You don't want to be thinking about whether or not it's going to work that day, or whatever, it would be indicative of instability or technical immaturity. I'd point out, I think many system studies have suggested that to be economically viable, a fusion system, if it's based on inertial fusion, would need something like routine target gains of, I think the number's 30, but it may be 20 or something like that. So there's a lot of fundamental science that still needs to take place to go from what we demonstrated at the NIF to a truly high yield, high gain system that can then be the basis for all the technological development that Caroline was describing, materials research, coupling to the grid, targets at scale, the economics of how you actually go about producing targets for a rep-rated power plant. I mean, it's many challenges that are mind-boggling. These are exciting times.
They are. Your affiliate member map, Caroline, really is eye-catching, that there's then that many companies and types of technologies that also then are active. In essence, are companies that are growing and providing resources and other types of components to the overall effort. And that then is part of the broader economic development impact that we can see from this type of innovative technology.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and I love that slide too, but it truly is a mess. I need to figure out a better way to organize the affiliate member on there, but it is definitely a nice problem to have.
Yes, great. Well, thank you all. I know we rushed through fusion energy in just over a half an hour, but our annual meeting is going to continue. Thank you very much for your time today, and we'll look to continue to have additional forums where we can learn the latest of what's happening in fusion. Thank you both.